in the borough of Brooklyn on what's left of the Myrtle Avenue L, since discontinued and torn down. These were the last wooden L cars to operate in the United States. We're going to take you on a ride. You go up and down the line, you be able to see some of the structure in the trains. The cars were originally built in the 1890s as open-end motor cars. What I mean by that is the platforms at the ends were open and enclosed by gates. They were later converted to closed cars just before World War II. Long before World War II. They were used for the 1939 World's Fair. And 3 of these have since been opened up again. That big building you see in the background as we climb out of Navy Street on a long grade is one of the federal municipal buildings in Brooklyn. The trains were run motor, trailer, motor, 3-car sets, and normally 2 sets were put together during the day. As I remarked on another tape, these cars were pitifully underpowered. This was the last elevated line in Brooklyn, built to the traditional standards of cast iron pillows and lattice girders. The only line still in Brooklyn operating in this area is the Jamaica line, which is much later with the girder type structure. What you see is a westbound J Jamaica train. It's actually bound for New York City. He crosses below us at this point, and the train coming up is a southbound train to Myrtle Avenue. This is Broadway Myrtle Station. There is a connection between the 2 lines at this point. However, the heavy cars could not operate south of this point because of the light structure. Now we're at the northern end of the line. It is a BMT standards in regular service yet. Junk New York City Transit Authority MAC buses. And the famous A train, which is no longer an A train but being used on the BMT. As they start to get rid of the BMT steel cars, they brought the cars over from the IND, because the IND at that point was getting new cars too. This is taken at the Metropolitan Avenue station. This is all since burned down and been rebuilt as a concrete station. The line was at ground level at this point. At one time even operated with trolley poles, as far as Wyckoff Avenue, where it climbed up onto the L structure. The L structure was later extended all the way down to Fresh Pond Road, and then the line went down onto the ground at this point. Sometimes on a hot summer evening you could ride back and forth with the windows open and get quite an eyeful of what was going on in the multi-story residential buildings that lined the tracks from both sides. Now we're on the train. We're headed downtown to J Street. I'll also add, at one time the line did go further, turned and went over the Brooklyn Bridge. That in itself was unique, because at the same time you had electric third rail elevated trains, cable hauled elevated trains that just operated over the bridge, and streetcars, a footpath, and horse and wagon. so the bridge was quite busy. It was later deemed unsafe to continue running the trains across the bridge because of the weight placed upon it. So until the end of World War II, the streetcars continued to operate across. The elevated trains being taken off about 1939. It's an interesting study in contrast between the new apartment houses and the much older buildings that go back to the late 1800s. A lot of these buildings still exist along the line. However, the line has all been abandoned and taken down. So often is the case, the politicians tell us that an elevated line must be taken down in order for a neighborhood to improve. But in reality, we see the elevated lines taken down and no improvement being made. Another little note I might throw in here is up until the line was taken out of service and abandoned, the stations were heated by hand-fired coal stoves. And it was amusing to see a 6-car elevated train come along pushing a flat car with low boards on the sides with 70-pound canvas bags full of coal. And the train would come into the station and stop, and the crew on the train would run down with the bags of coal to supply the station head house with. If you look over to the left side of the right-of-way, you will notice the typical Brooklyn open third rail. There's no protective board or cover of any kind on this third rail. Just the porcelain insulators that supported it. Cars had gravity-type shoes on them that rode directly over the third rail, as opposed to the subway style which stick out from the third rail shoe beam. Now this is a long hill between Navy Street and J Street, and I was always afraid of what would happen if a motorman wasn't very vigilant, as these cars had straight air brakes and there was really nothing to stop you from using all your air up, as opposed to automatic where low air pressure would apply the brakes on the train line. But it never did happen. As we come down the hill, we notice the signals are red. These are timer signals to limit the speed of the train to 12 miles an hour. As we approach J Street, we see the large building that blocks the line. This was not there, as I said earlier. The line continued on. The odd girder structure that you see there is actually a bridge that crosses Flatbush Avenue Extension, which is the approach to the Manhattan Bridge. And the idea of the girder being that there was an extra long span at that point. Now we see a midday 3-car train leaving J Street, headed back toward Metropolitan Avenue. As I said, this is all gone now and it's all been torn down. Only the buildings remain. And from the building I used to work in. These were the old R9 type cars, made famous by Duke Ellington in his song Take the A Train. They replaced the BMT standards on the BMT Eastern Division. That's a train coming into East New York Yard on a very, very sharp curve around. The yellow end indicates that it's a work car, or a permanent way gang, or somebody like that. That's what they call them. We call it a work car. The train is westbound coming into Alabama Avenue Station. If you might look carefully, you'll see the conductor out in between the cars, opening and closing the doors. Some of these pictures were taken from inside the East New York Transit Authority complex. The cars being shunted in and out of the yard. Transit Authority had an odd way of doing things. They would bring an 8-car train in, and rather than inspect the entire 8 cars, they would merely pull one car out of the train that was due mileage-wise and inspect that. It was very seldom to see the same cars in the same train day in and day out. Would you like to take a guess on what that was? It was a garbage train. Now you see a train on the 14th Street Canarsie line, westbound. Cars are painted a dark brown, and I think this might have something to do with the poor quality of the photographs, the photography.